On this episode of China Uncensored, Trump's inauguration means change. And not just for that Chinese Obama impersonator who's about to be out of a job. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. This Friday, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the 45th President of the United States. Now, Trump has repeatedly said he'll be hard on China when he enters office. Exact details are a bit sparse, but hey, how could you not trust this guy? You know, it used to be that politicians just needed to wear a flag pin to prove they loved America. Anyway, it's clear that the relationship between China and the U.S. will never be the same. But what's going to change? I mean, China already built a wall and paid for it, but that was ages ago. So let's take a look at 5 huge ways Trump's inauguration is going to change U.S.-China relations. Number 5, currency manipulation. Donald Trump has promised to label China a currency manipulator.
I'm going to instruct my Treasury Secretary to label China a currency manipulator, which should have been done years ago.
Yes, it should have been done years ago. For much of the last 20 years, the Chinese regime manipulated its currency to keep it weak, so that China could become the world's leader in cheap labor, cheap goods, and confused childhoods. That made China's economy grow, but it's also one of the many reasons why the U.S. lost millions of manufacturing jobs. It also helped create a huge trade imbalance with China. But more recently, the Chinese regime has the opposite problem. China's economy is slowing down, and wealthy Chinese are moving their money out of the country. These are 2 reasons why the Chinese currency is weak to the point of being unhealthy. So now, the regime has been manipulating their currency the other way, trying to keep it strong. In other words, the Chinese regime is now manipulating their currency in a way that helps the U.S. So even if Trump could force China to stop manipulating its currency now, it wouldn't really benefit the U.S. Of course, labeling China a currency manipulator doesn't actually force them to do anything. So Trump has another idea. Slap tariffs on China. But that could lead to... Number 4, trade war. The kind of war whose greatest weapon is how boring it is to talk about. This really deserves its own episode. But Trump has been criticizing trade with China since the Republican primaries.
China is ripping us on trade. They're devaluing their currency, and they're killing our companies.
Of course, it's always important to remember what presidents say on the campaign trail and what they actually do are 2 very different things. When Bill Clinton first ran, he criticized George Bush Sr. for being soft on the butchers of Beijing. And then, well, that's sort of the reason why we're where we are now. Trump has threatened to slap tariffs on Chinese imports. That's going to be challenging because legally, you can only put tariffs on specific goods, not an entire country. And I mean, you can't. Trump will probably decide he can do anything he wants, even if it means flying in the face of international trade laws and starting a trade war. And the loser in that would be the Chinese regime. China's economy is slowing, and the regime has maintained its grip on power by promising economic stability. Anything that poses a risk to that poses a risk to the Communist Party's leadership. As for the U.S., a trade war might hurt in the short term, but not as much as it would hurt China. China could lose millions of jobs, while under the right conditions, the U.S. might gain some of its manufacturing back. Or the U.S. could always import those cheap nightmare toys from Malaysia, Vietnam, and so on. So, what does Xi Jinping think about this? It's hard to tell. Okay, I guess it's pretty clear. Speaking of unwinnable wars, number 3, North Korea. Remember this fun little prediction back in September last year?
Probably by the end of the first term of the person we're electing this November, they are going to have the ability to put nuclear warheads on missiles that can reach the west coast of the United States.
Well, we now know that person is Trump. The Hermit Kingdom is, well, kind of in everyone's face. North Korea now has enough plutonium to make 10 nuclear bombs. Thanks, Obama. Sorry, I know that doesn't make any sense here, but it's basically the last time I can use that. Really, we have this guy to thank. Walking hemorrhoid and former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin. According to this Radio Free Asia report, he started giving nuclear material to North Korea after he took office in 1989. Anyway, Trump holds China partly responsible for the North Korean nuclear problem.
So China has to get involved, and China should solve that problem, and we should put pressure on China to solve the problem.
But Trump doesn't want to just rely on China.
Maybe it's a lot better for us if Japan pays their own way, they arm, and they take care of North Korea, instead of us taking care of it, right?
And he said similar things about South Korea.
But South Korea should pay us, and pay us very substantially for protecting them.
Or else they can just protect themselves. So Trump's solution to a nuclear North Korea is a nuclear South Korea and a nuclear Japan, which will go down so well with nuclear China. One big nuclear family. Let's just hope they don't go hugging each other with nuclear arms. But what happens to the children of divorce? Well, that brings us to number 2, Taiwan. Trump was changing U.S.-Taiwan relations before even becoming president. China considers Taiwan a breakaway province and is committed to reunification. And by reunification, they mean conquest. But the Chinese regime has been kind enough to hold off invasion plans as long as everyone agrees to the One China policy, where everyone collectively pretends that Taiwan is not a country. So they weren't happy when Trump became the first president in over 40 years to accept a phone call from the president of Taiwan, and then say the entire One China policy is negotiable. Now, state-run media China Daily is saying China will take off the gloves if Trump continues. What does that mean? Well, according to hardcore state-run media, the Global Times, that means merciless reunification. And they really mean it. No, seriously. Seriously. And speaking of disputed territories that I personally have been to, number 1, the South China Sea. Well, if Taiwan is the region that China doesn't really want to go to war over, the South China Sea is the U.S.'s war bluff. The Chinese military has been aggressively expanding in disputed territorial waters there. China may or may not have historical claims to that region, but man, does the Communist Party have to be such jerks about it? Attacking fishermen? Building military bases? I mean, whatever happened to sharing is caring, people?
Sharing is something you can do whenever you want to.
Do they even have Care Bears in China? Okay, sort of. Back to the South China Sea. In the last few years, under President Obama, U.S. naval presence flooded the region, intimidating China so much that they would steal a research drone right in front of them. But according to Trump's new Secretary of State, that's going to change.
We're going to have to send China a clear signal that first, the island building stops, and second, your access to those islands is also not going to be allowed.
Using the U.S. military to blockade China from the region would be a big change. It would also put Chinese leader Xi Jinping at risk. He's locked in a massive battle for power over the Communist Party. Xi can't afford to look weak, especially against the U.S. on issues like Taiwan and the South China Sea. If Trump has an aggressive China policy, Xi may be forced to take a more aggressive stance against the U.S. to maintain his position. Trump has been unpredictable. At first, many thought Trump's isolationist policies would pull the U.S. out of Asia and let China sweep the South China Sea. But it's looking like that's not going to happen. So as we move forward into the beginning of the Trump presidency, may it be huge and everlasting. What do you think is in store for the U.S. and China? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. And you know what? Why the heck not? One last time. Thanks, Obama.